My mom got herself a new husband and gave birth to his golden child. I was moved to live in the guest room, and when I moved out and inherited $11 million, they sued me. Growing up, my life wasn't perfect, but it was simple. My mom and I had always been a team, just the two of us against the world. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That all changed when I was 14. Mom started dating John, a guy she'd met through work. He seemed fine at first, polite and even a little charming, but I wasn't sure about him. I mean, how do you really feel about a stranger suddenly being a big part of your life? It wasn't like I had a say. Things moved quickly between them. Within a year, they got married, and John moved in with us. But it wasn't just him. He had a son, Alex, who was a year older than me. I didn't know much about Alex before he arrived, other than that he had lived with his mom up until that point. From what Mom told me, John and his ex-wife had split years ago, and Alex was coming to stay with us full-time. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of sharing my space with a stepbrother, but I figured it couldn't be worse than the changes I was already dealing with. The first time I met Alex was awkward, to say the least. He wasn't rude, but he wasn't friendly either. He had this aloofness about him, like he didn't want to be there any more than I wanted him to be. I remember sitting across from him at dinner the night they moved in. Mom was trying so hard to make conversation, asking Alex about school and his interests, but he just gave these short, one-word answers. I kept my head down, barely touching my food, and tried to avoid looking at him. For the first few weeks, things were tense. Alex and I tiptoed around each other like we were strangers in a shared hotel room. I think part of it was that neither of us wanted this. I didn't want to suddenly have a stepbrother, and he clearly wasn't thrilled about having to share his dad with me and my mom. But there was something else, too. Alex had this edge to him, like he was carrying a chip on his shoulder. It made it hard to get close to him, even if I wanted to. One night, though, everything boiled over. It was a stupid fight, really. He'd left his stuff all over the bathroom, and when I asked him to clean it up, he snapped at me. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something sharp and mean, and before I knew it, we were shouting at each other. Mom and John had to step in to break it up. Afterward, I stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. I remember lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondering how I was going to survive this new life. Despite the fight, things started to change between us after that. It wasn't like we became best friends overnight, but there was a shift. Maybe we both realized that if we were going to be stuck together, we might as well try to get along. Slowly, we started talking more, not about anything deep, just small stuff like school or TV shows we both liked. I found out that Alex was really into music. He played guitar, and he was actually pretty good. Sometimes, I'd hear him practicing in his room, and I'd catch myself humming along. Over time, we found a kind of rhythm. We weren't exactly close, but we weren't at each other's throats anymore, either. It felt like progress, even if it was slow. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't as simple as they seemed. There was this tension in the house, like everyone was trying too hard to make everything seem normal. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about John and Alex didn't quite add up. It was small things at first. A look that lingered too long. A conversation that abruptly changed when I walked into the room. I started to notice how much time John spent with Alex, more than he did with Mom. It wasn't just father-son bonding. It was something else, something that made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the feeling didn't go away. One night, I overheard a heated argument between Mom and John. I was in my room, but their voices carried through the thin walls. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I caught enough to know it was about Alex. Mom was upset, accusing John of hiding something from her. John denied it, but his tone was defensive. I sat on my bed, my heart pounding, wondering what was going on. The next day, Mom acted like nothing had happened, but I could tell she was on edge. She avoided eye contact with John and seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. I wanted to ask her about it, but I didn't know how. I figured if she wanted me to know, she'd tell me. So I kept quiet and tried to focus on school, but the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. A few weeks later, everything came to a head. It was a Saturday night, and Mom and John were out at a work event. Alex and I were home alone, and for once, we were actually getting along. We decided to watch a movie in the living room. About halfway through, Alex got up to grab a drink from the kitchen. He was gone for a while, so I went to check on him. I found him standing by the fridge, staring at a piece of paper in his hand. "What's that?" I asked, curious. He looked up at me, his face pale. "It's nothing," he said, crumpling the paper and shoving it into his pocket. But I wasn't buying it. "Alex, come on. What is it?" He hesitated, then sighed and pulled the paper back out. "I found it in the drawer," he said, handing it to me. It was a letter addressed to John. The handwriting was neat and feminine, and as I read the first few lines, my stomach dropped. The letter was from Alex's mom, and it wasn't just a casual note. She was accusing John of something serious. I won't go into details, but let's just say it was enough to make my hands shake. "Does Mom know about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex shook his head. "I don't think so." We stared at each other, the weight of the letter hanging between us. Suddenly, everything about John made sense. The tension, the arguments, the way he acted around Alex. It was like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was trying to solve, and now all the pieces were falling into place. I didn't know what to do or who to trust, but one thing was clear. Our lives were about to change, and not for the better. By the time I turned 16, I didn't recognize my life or my family anymore. What started as an uneasy truce with my stepdad John and stepbrother Alex turned into something darker and lonelier. Things had been tense since that night Alex and I found the letter from his mom, but neither of us dared bring it up again. Instead, we pretended everything was fine, like good little soldiers. The truth, though, was that things were far from fine. Mom announced her pregnancy about 6 months after John moved in. I didn't know how to feel. I mean, it wasn't like I was thrilled about John in the first place, and now they were having a baby together? A baby that would tie our family together forever? But what could I say? Mom was glowing, happier than I'd seen her in years. I didn't want to ruin that for her. Henry was born the following spring. At first, I thought having a baby around might bring us closer as a family. But the opposite happened. Mom and John were completely wrapped up in him, as if nothing else in the world mattered. I tried to help out, hoping it might earn me some attention. I'd babysit, clean bottles, even change diapers, things I never imagined myself doing. But no matter how much I did, it was like I didn't exist. Henry was the golden child, the miracle baby, and I was just there. The final blow came when Mom and John decided to move me out of my room. "It's just temporary," Mom said one morning over breakfast, her voice syrupy sweet like she was trying to sell me something. "Henry needs more space, and we thought you could move to the attic." The attic? Like I was some kind of unwanted guest. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking. But she wasn't. John chimed in, his tone flat and businesslike. "We'll make it comfortable for you. It's a nice space, quiet and private. You'll love it." Love it? I wanted to scream. My room was the only place that felt like mine in this house, and now they were taking it away. But I knew better than to argue. Arguing only made things worse. So I nodded and forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. Moving to the attic felt like being exiled. The space was dusty and cramped, with a single tiny window that let in barely any light. Mom tried to make it seem special, bringing up a new rug and some fairy lights, but it didn't change the fact that I'd been pushed aside for the new and improved family. Worse than the physical isolation was the emotional one. Whenever something went wrong in the house, it was my fault. Henry cried too much? It was because I was too noisy. Dinner wasn't ready on time? I should have helped Mom more. The tension between John and Alex? Somehow, I was to blame for that too. It didn't matter what I did or didn't do. I was the scapegoat. I started to withdraw. What was the point of trying when nothing I did was ever good enough? I threw myself into school, spending hours at the library just to avoid going home. I even joined the debate club, something I'd never had any interest in before, just so I'd have an excuse to stay late. It was during one of these late nights that I met Claire. She was a senior, bold and brash with a streak of bright pink in her hair. Claire was everything I wasn't: confident, fearless, unapologetic. She took one look at me and decided we were going to be friends. I didn't have much of a choice in the matter. "You're too nice," she said one day as we sat on the steps outside the library. Let me guess. Your family walks all over you. I blinked, startled by how quickly she'd zeroed in on the truth. It's complicated, I said, trying to downplay it. Claire smirked. It always is. But trust me, you don't have to take their crap. She became my lifeline, pulling me out of my shell little by little. We'd hang out at her house after school, talking about everything and nothing. Her parents were the total opposite of mine. Relaxed, supportive, and genuinely interested in what she had to say. It was like stepping into an alternate universe. But no matter how much time I spent with Claire, I couldn't escape the mess waiting for me at home. The tension with Alex had simmered into a strange kind of truce, but it was clear he had his own issues with John. I'd catch him sneaking out late at night or coming home with bruises he wouldn't explain. When I asked him about it, he'd just shrug and say, "It's nothing." One night, I overheard him arguing with John in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the anger in them was unmistakable. I crept down the stairs, careful not to make a sound, and listened from the hallway. "You promised me," Alex hissed. "You said things would be different." "I'm doing my best," John shot back. "But you need to keep your mouth shut. Do you understand me?" There was a long silence, and then the sound of something crashing, maybe a plate or a glass. I froze, my heart pounding. What the hell was going on between them? The next morning, Alex was gone. Mom said he decided to move back in with his mom, but the way she said it didn't sit right with me. She wouldn't look me in the eye, and John was unusually quiet. I tried texting Alex, but he didn't respond. It was like he'd disappeared. After that, things spiraled even more. Mom and John were constantly on edge, snapping at each other over the smallest things. Henry, now a toddler, was fussy and demanding, and no one seemed to have the patience to deal with him. And me? I was just trying to survive, keeping my head down and staying out of the way. But the final straw came one rainy afternoon when I got home from school to find the attic door locked. I jiggled the handle, confused, and then knocked. "Mom? Is someone in there?" No answer. I went downstairs to find Mom in the kitchen, her face pale and tight. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "We've decided it's best if you stay in the guest room for now." The guest room. The tiny, windowless room at the back of the house that we used for storage. My stomach sank. "Why?" "Henry needs a quiet space to nap during the day," she said, avoiding my eyes. "It's just practical." Practical. That word again, used to justify pushing me further and further out of the family. I felt the anger bubbling up, but I swallowed it down. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds. That night, as I lay on the lumpy guest room bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I realized something. I didn't belong here anymore. Maybe I never had. By the time I was 17, I had mastered the art of being invisible. In my house, it was a survival skill. Mom and John were consumed by Henry, who was now 3 years old and treated like the second coming of Christ. And Alex? He could do no wrong in their eyes, even when he was clearly screwing up. It was like they lived on a different planet, a planet where I didn't matter. Alex came back after being gone for nearly a year. No explanation, no apology, just strolled in one evening like nothing had happened. Mom was thrilled, acting like it was some kind of family reunion. "He's been through a lot," she told me, as if I hadn't. "We need to support him." Support him? The guy had ghosted us for months, and now he was supposed to just pick up where he left off? I didn't say anything, though. I'd learned the hard way that speaking up never ended well for me. At first, Alex seemed different, calmer, maybe. But it didn't take long for his old habits to resurface. He started coming home late, reeking of alcohol, and I once found a crumpled pack of cigarettes in the bathroom that I was sure belonged to him. When I told Mom about it, she waved it off. "He's a young man," she said, as if that excused everything. One night, Alex borrowed John's car without asking. He came back hours later, the front bumper scratched and the headlight smashed. I expected John to lose it. He was particular about his car, always washing and waxing it like it was some kind of trophy. But instead, John just sighed and said, "Accidents happen. Accidents happen?" I couldn't keep my mouth shut this time. "If I so much as look at that car, you'd ground me for a month." John glared at me, his jaw tightening. "This doesn't concern you, Emma." Of course, it didn't. Nothing ever did. Unless it was my fault. Meanwhile, Henry was becoming a terror. He screamed if he didn't get his way, threw tantrums in public, and refused to eat anything that wasn't shaped like a dinosaur. But instead of disciplining him, Mom and John caved to his every whim. "He's just a baby," Mom would say, as if that excused his behavior. But he wasn't just a baby. He was a spoiled brat who knew exactly how to manipulate them. Once, he broke one of my favorite mugs, a ceramic owl I'd painted at summer camp years ago. I caught him in the act, standing there with the pieces in his tiny hands. "Henry, why would you do that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He pouted, his lower lip trembling. "It was ugly," he said simply, and then started crying, loud, dramatic wails that brought Mom running. "What happened?" she asked, scooping Henry up in her arms. "He broke my mug," I said, holding up the shattered pieces. Mom barely glanced at me. "It's just a mug, Emma. Don't make a big deal out of it." I wanted to scream. It wasn't just a mug. It was one of the few things I had that was mine. But there was no point in arguing. Mom's attention was already back on Henry, soothing him like he was the victim. Things came to a head one evening when Alex threw a party while Mom and John were out of town. I wasn't invited, of course, but I couldn't exactly ignore it. The music was so loud it shook the walls, and the house filled with strangers I'd never seen before. I stayed in my room, trying to block out the noise, but it was impossible. Around midnight, someone banged on my door. "Hey, come join us," a girl slurred, her words barely intelligible. She reeked of vodka and cheap perfume. "No, thanks," I said, trying to close the door, but she wedged her foot in the frame. "Don't be such a buzzkill," she whined, grabbing my arm. I yanked it away, slamming the door in her face. My heart was pounding, and I could feel tears stinging my eyes. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a circus, and I was the forgotten clown. When Mom and John came back the next day, the house was a disaster. Empty beer cans and red Solo cups littered every surface, the couch cushions were stained, and someone had even cracked the glass coffee table. I thought, finally, Alex would face some consequences. But instead, John helped him clean up and told him to be more careful next time. Next time? There shouldn't even be a next time. I couldn't take it anymore. Why does he always get a free pass? I blurted out, my voice trembling with anger. He wrecks the house, he wrecks the car, and you just let him get away with it. If I did half the stuff he does, you'd never let me hear the end of it. Enough, Emma, Mom snapped. You're being dramatic. Dramatic? I laughed bitterly. You don't even see me anymore. All you care about is Alex and Henry. Mom's face hardened. Maybe if you stopped acting like a victim all the time, people would care about you. Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to fight back, to say something that would make her see how unfair this all was. But I couldn't. My throat closed up, and the tears I'd been holding back spilled over. I ran to my room, or rather, the guest room, and slammed the door, the sound echoing through the house. I spent the rest of the day packing a bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there anymore. Claire was the first person I thought of, so I texted her, and she replied immediately, "Come over. My parents won't mind." I left that evening, slipping out while Mom and John were busy with Henry. As I walked down the street, the weight of everything finally hit me. I'd spent years fighting for a place in a family that didn't want me. And now, I was done fighting. I don't remember the exact moment I decided I was done with my family, but by my senior year of high school, the thought of staying in that house made my skin crawl. My life there had become a cycle of being ignored, blamed, or brushed aside, and I couldn't take it anymore. The only thing that kept me going was the idea that I could escape once I turned 18. But waiting for freedom wasn't enough. I needed support, a lifeline, something to remind me that I wasn't as invisible as I felt at home. School became that refuge. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't have a ton of friends, but it was better than being home. Better than watching Mom fuss over Henry or listening to John excuse Alex's latest screw-up. At school, at least, I could be someone other than the problem child. I spent most of my time with Claire, who was still my best and only real friend. Her house had become my second home, a place where I could breathe without walking on eggshells. Her parents, Jen and Mike, treated me like one of their own. Jen was a teacher, and Mike worked in IT, and they had this way of making their house feel warm and safe. They never pried, but I think they knew things weren't great at home. Whenever I stayed over, Jen would leave little snacks for us in the kitchen, and Mike would let me borrow books from his massive collection. It was the kind of kindness I hadn't experienced in years. Claire, of course, was the opposite of subtle. "You should just move in with us," she said one afternoon as we sat on her bedroom floor, painting our nails. "I can't," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "My mom would freak out." Claire snorted. "She'd probably just blame you for abandoning her, or some crap like that." She wasn't wrong. Mom had a way of twisting everything to make it my fault. But even so, leaving wasn't that simple. I didn't want to depend on Claire's family forever. I wanted to stand on my own. That's when I decided to get a job. I'd been thinking about it for a while, and when I saw a help wanted sign in the window of a local diner, I knew it was my chance. It was a small place, the kind that served greasy burgers and bottomless coffee, and the owner, Linda, was this no-nonsense woman in her 50s who reminded me a little of my grandmother. She hired me on the spot, saying she liked my honest face. Working at the diner was hard, but it gave me something I desperately needed: independence. I loved the rhythm of it, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the smell of coffee brewing. It made me feel useful, like I was part of something. And for the first time in a long time, I had my own money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start saving for the future. The people I worked with became a sort of makeshift family. There was Maria, the head waitress, who had been there for 20 years and knew every customer by name. She took me under her wing, teaching me how to balance trays and deal with rude customers. Then there was Danny, the cook, who was in his early 20s and always cracking jokes to lighten the mood. He'd sneak me extra fries when Linda wasn't looking, saying, "You've earned it, kid." But the person I bonded with the most was Lily, another waitress who was a few years older than me. She was studying nursing and working nights at the diner to pay for school. Lily had this calm, steady presence that made me feel safe. She'd listen when I vented about my family and never judged me for it. "You deserve better," she told me once, her voice firm. "Don't let them drag you down." I clung to those words. They became my mantra on the days when everything felt too heavy to bear. At school, things were a mixed bag. I kept my grades up, mostly because I needed a scholarship if I ever wanted to go to college. But socially, I still felt like an outsider. Most of my classmates were focused on prom and football games, things I couldn't care less about. Claire tried to include me, dragging me to a few parties, but I always ended up feeling out of place. It was like everyone else was living in color, and I was stuck in black and white. The real breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference night. Mom and John were supposed to meet with my English teacher, Mr. Carter, who had been pushing me to apply to a prestigious writing program. He said I had talent and that the program could open doors for me. I was excited, for once, and I thought maybe, just maybe, Mom would see it as something to be proud of. But they didn't show up. I waited in the hallway for over an hour, watching other parents come and go, until Mr. Carter finally came out to find me. "Did they get held up?" he asked gently. "I guess so," I lied, my face burning with shame. When I got home, Mom didn't even apologize. She just shrugged and said, "We got busy with Henry. You know how it is." It was like a switch flipped inside me. I stopped caring about their approval. If they couldn't bother to show up for me, why should I keep bending over backward to please them? That's when I started spending more and more time away from home. Between school, work, and hanging out with Claire, I was hardly there anymore. And when I was, I kept to myself, avoiding conversations and keeping my head down. The guest room, once a symbol of everything I'd lost, became my sanctuary. I filled it with little things that made it feel like mine: fairy lights, books, and pictures Claire had taken of us goofing around. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that there was a world outside the walls of that house. One night, after a particularly rough shift at the diner, I came home to find Henry in my room. He was sitting on my bed, holding one of my journals. My heart sank. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes that everyone seemed to adore. I wanted to see your drawings. I snatched the journal from his hands, my chest tight with anger. This is private, I said, my voice shaking. You can't just come in here and take my stuff. Henry's lip quivered, and within seconds, he was crying, loud, dramatic sobs that brought Mom running. What's going on? She demanded, scooping Henry into her arms. He was in my room, going through my things, I said, holding up the journal as proof. Mom barely glanced at me. He's just a child, Emma. You don't have to be so mean. Mean. That was the word she always used to shut me down. As if standing up for myself made me the bad guy. I wanted to scream, to make her see how unfair it all was, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She'd made up her mind long ago about who I was, and nothing I said would change that. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop walking until I reached Claire's house. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask any questions. She just hugged me and said, "Stay as long as you need." I turned 18 in the middle of my senior year. To everyone else, it probably seemed like a normal birthday. There was no party, no celebration, just a cupcake Claire brought to school and a few half-hearted happy birthdays from my classmates. At home, Mom made spaghetti, my so-called favorite meal, even though she knew I hadn't liked it in years. Henry sang me a garbled version of Happy Birthday, and John gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. Alex didn't even bother showing up. I went to bed that night feeling nothing but relief. I was finally an adult. That meant one thing, freedom. For months, I'd been saving every dollar I earned at the diner. I didn't spend a cent unless I absolutely had to, skipping out on new clothes, fancy coffees, or anything that wasn't essential. By the time my birthday rolled around, I had enough for a deposit on a tiny apartment about a mile from school. It wasn't much, just a studio with peeling wallpaper and a kitchen the size of a closet, but it was mine. The thought alone made it feel like a palace. I waited until the weekend to tell Mom and John. It wasn't exactly a family meeting, but I figured I owed them a heads up. Mom was folding laundry in the living room while John tinkered with some gadget at the dining table. Henry was on the floor playing with his trucks, making loud, growling engine noises that no one seemed to mind. "Can I talk to you guys for a second?" I said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Mom looked up, distracted. "What is it, Emma?" I took a deep breath, clutching the edge of the doorframe. "I'm moving out." For a moment, there was silence. Then Mom blinked, like she hadn't heard me right. "What do you mean, moving out?" "I mean I'm moving into my own apartment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've already signed the lease. I'll be moving next weekend." John set down his screwdriver, frowning. "You can't just leave." "I'm 18, I said firmly. "I can do what I want." Mom stood up, her hands clutching a towel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Where is this coming from? You didn't even talk to us about this." "I didn't think I needed to," I said. "It's not like you care what I do anyway." Her face twisted with hurt, but I didn't back down. I'd spent years swallowing my feelings, letting her and John walk all over me. "Not anymore." "You're being ridiculous," John said, his voice sharp. "You don't even know how to take care of yourself. Do you think you can just waltz into the real world and everything will be handed to you?" "I've been taking care of myself for years," I shot back. "You just never noticed." Mom's voice cracked. "Emma, we're your family. Why are you doing this?" "Because this house isn't a home anymore," I said. "It hasn't been for a long time." The argument went on for over an hour. Mom cried. John yelled. Henry, sensing the tension, started crying too, which only made things worse. At one point, Alex walked in and tried to intervene, but I told him to stay out of it. He just shrugged and left again, clearly uninterested in the drama. By the end of it, I was exhausted, but I didn't budge. I'd made my decision, and no amount of guilt-tripping or shouting was going to change that. Mom finally gave up, slumping into a chair with tears streaming down her face. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you want to leave so badly, go." So I did. Moving into my own place was the best decision I ever made. Sure, it wasn't easy. The apartment was tiny, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV blaring at all hours of the night. The stove barely worked, and the shower had a tendency to spit out cold water without warning. but it was mine. No one could barge in uninvited or tell me what to do. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay rent, juggling school, and work like my life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. On my days off, I'd curl up on the lumpy couch I'd found at a thrift store and read, savoring the quiet. Claire visited often, bringing me little housewarming gifts like scented candles or a set of mismatched mugs she'd found at a flea market. She'd flop onto the couch, propping her feet up on the coffee table and say, "This place is so you." Lily from the diner became another constant in my life. She'd pick me up for work in her beat-up car and bring me leftovers from her nursing classes, like anatomy flashcards or snacks she'd swiped from the student lounge. "You're doing great," she told me one night as we sat in her car after a late shift. "It's hard, but you're handling it better than most people I know." Her words meant more to me than I could say. For so long, I'd felt like I was failing, at school, at work, at life in general. But hearing someone believe in me made me think maybe, just maybe, I could do this. Of course, my relationship with my family didn't magically improve after I moved out. If anything, it got worse. Mom called occasionally, but the conversations were always strained. She'd ask how I was doing, then launch into a monologue about how much Henry missed me or how Alex was, turning his life around. It was like she wanted to remind me of everything I'd left behind, as if that would make me come running back. John didn't bother calling at all. When I saw him at family events, he barely acknowledged me, treating me like an acquaintance rather than his stepdaughter. And Alex? He was the same as always, charming when he needed to be, dismissive the rest of the time. The only time they seemed genuinely interested in my life was when I mentioned college. I'd been accepted into a local community college, with plans to transfer to a 4-year university later. Mom acted supportive, but I could tell she didn't understand why I was bothering. "You already have a job," she said once. "Why not just stick with that?" Because I wanted more, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. There was no point. I never thought of myself as someone who'd be rich. Growing up, I got used to living paycheck to paycheck, and even after moving out, I was just scraping by. So when I found out I'd inherited $11 million, I thought it was some kind of joke. But it wasn't. It started with a phone call. I was at work, wiping down tables after the lunch rush, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't answer it. Unknown numbers usually meant spam, but something made me pick up. "Is this Emma Peterson?" a man asked. His voice was professional, measured. Yes. "Who's this?" "My name is Edward Carroll. I'm an attorney for the estate of Mary Peterson." Mary Peterson. The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. My dad's sister. I'd only met her once, years ago, before my dad passed away. She was tall and elegant, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. I remembered her as kind but distant, a little intimidating. After my dad died, she sent cards for my birthdays, but we'd lost touch over the years. I didn't even know she'd passed away. "I'm sorry to inform you," Edward continued, "that your Aunt Mary passed away last month. She named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate." I blinked, stunned. "Beneficiary? What does that mean?" "It means she left everything to you." Everything turned out to be $11 million. My jaw nearly hit the floor when he told me. I could barely comprehend it. Edward explained that Aunt Mary had admired my independence, that she'd followed my life from a distance and felt I deserved a fresh start. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I hung up the phone in a daze, my heart pounding. I told Claire first. She screamed so loud I thought she'd break my eardrums. "You're a freaking millionaire," she yelled, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me. "Do you even know what this means?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "What am I supposed to do with that kind of money?" "Anything you want," she said, grinning. "You're free, Em. You can quit the diner, travel the world, buy a freaking mansion." Her excitement was contagious, but deep down, I felt uneasy. I'd been poor my entire life. The idea of having that much money scared me more than it thrilled me. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Within days, my phone was ringing off the hook. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives crawling out of the woodwork to congratulate me. But not all the attention was welcome. My family found out, and that's when the trouble started. Mom called me first. She didn't waste any time getting to the point. Emma, honey, I heard about the inheritance. That's such wonderful news for the family. For the family? I repeated, already feeling my stomach tighten. Well, of course, she said, her tone sugary sweet. I mean, we've all supported each other through so much. It's only fair to share the blessing. Share the blessing. I should have seen it coming, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. Mom, the money is legally mine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Aunt Mary left it to me, and we're so proud of you, she said quickly. But think about how much this could help everyone. Your little brother Henry could go to private school. John could fix the roof. Alex could get his life back on track. Alex can get a job. I snapped, my patience already wearing thin. And you and John have plenty of money for the roof. Her tone shifted, becoming sharper. Don't be selfish, Emma. We're your family. We've done so much for you. Like what? I interrupted. Pushing me into the attic? Ignoring me for years? Blaming me for everything that went wrong in your lives? She gasped, as if I'd slapped her. I can't believe you're being so ungrateful. Ungrateful. That word hung in the air like a poison. I ended the call before I could say something I'd regret. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Mom wasn't the only one who came after me. John called, trying to act reasonable. Look, Emma, he said, I understand you're upset, but we're just asking for a small share. 10%, maybe. That's nothing to you. It's everything to me, I said. This money is my chance to build a life for myself. Don't you think Henry deserves a better life too? He shot back. He's your brother, Emma. Half-brother, I corrected. And that's not my responsibility. The calls kept coming, escalating from guilt trips to outright demands. Alex was the worst. He didn't even bother pretending to be nice. You're sitting on millions, he sneered one night when he cornered me outside my apartment building. The least you could do is throw some my way. I don't owe you anything, I said, trying to push past him. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Don't be such a bitch, Emma. You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for Dad's side of the family. I yanked my arm free, my heart pounding. Stay away from me, Alex. I mean it. Things took a darker turn when they brought in a lawyer. Or at least, that's what they claimed. A man named Richard Bennett showed up at my apartment one evening, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase. He introduced himself as the family's attorney and demanded a meeting to discuss the fair division of the inheritance. Legally, the money is mine, I said, crossing my arms. I don't have to share it. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's not entirely accurate. Your mother has grounds to claim a portion of the estate under family equity laws. Family equity laws? I didn't know much about legal stuff, but something about his argument felt off. I'll need to talk to my own lawyer, I said. Of course, Richard said smoothly, but I'd advise you to settle this amicably. A drawn-out legal battle could be costly. As soon as he left, I called Edward, my real attorney. He assured me there were no such laws that applied to my case. They're bluffing, he said. The inheritance is airtight. They can't touch it. Knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. The fact that my own family had stooped so low to intimidate me was a pain I couldn't shake. I felt betrayed, angry, and more alone than ever. I stood my ground, but it wasn't easy. The constant calls, the fake lawyer, the guilt trips, it all took a toll. But through it all, I held on to one thought. Aunt Mary had chosen me for a reason. She believed in me, even when no one else did. I wasn't going to let her down. Eventually, the calls stopped. Maybe they realized they couldn't break me, or maybe they just got tired of trying. Either way, I finally had peace. I used part of the inheritance to buy a new apartment, a bright and spacious place where I could start fresh. I donated to a few charities Aunt Mary had supported, honoring her legacy in a way that felt meaningful. As for my family, our relationship was colder than ever. Mom still sent the occasional guilt-laden text, but I stopped responding. I couldn't let her pull me back into her web. I'd spent my whole life fighting for a place in that family, and now I realized I didn't need one. I had my own life, my own future, and that was more than enough. I didn't cut ties with my family overnight. At first, I thought I could salvage some kind of relationship with them. despite everything they'd done. The fake lawyer, the manipulation, the constant demands for money. A part of me still wanted to believe they cared about me. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that they didn't see me as a person. To them, I was just a walking ATM. The final straw came in the form of a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was cold, clipped, as if she were speaking to a stranger. "Emma, I hope you're happy with yourself. Your selfishness has torn this family apart. Don't bother calling me again unless you're ready to do the right thing." I deleted the message without finishing it. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the city lights outside my window, and made a decision. I was done. Done with the guilt, the manipulation, the endless cycle of blame. They weren't my family anymore, not in any way that mattered. Cutting them off wasn't easy. Even after I blocked their numbers and stopped answering their emails, the echoes of their words lingered. Was I selfish? Ungrateful? Had I really torn the family apart? Those doubts crept in during the quiet moments, whispering in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. That's when Claire stepped in. She'd been my rock through everything, always ready with a sarcastic quip or a shoulder to cry on. But this time, she went above and beyond. One night, she showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and a stack of self-help books. "You need therapy," she announced, plopping the books onto my coffee table. "Like yesterday." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. The years of neglect, blame, and toxic relationships had left scars I couldn't ignore anymore. So I took her advice and found a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patel who made me feel safe from the moment I walked into her office. In our first session, I broke down crying within minutes. "I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm worth something," I admitted through tears. "And now that I have this money, it's like they only see the dollar signs." Dr. Patel nodded, her expression gentle. "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot of weight for a long time, Emma. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Therapy became a lifeline. With Dr. Patel's help, I started unpacking years of pain and self-doubt, peeling back layers I hadn't even realized were there. I learned to set boundaries, not just with my family, but with myself. I stopped blaming myself for their behavior, stopped letting their voices take up space in my head. It was hard work, but it was worth it. At the same time, I leaned on my friends more than ever. Claire, of course, was a constant presence, but I also grew closer to Lily, my coworker from the diner. We'd always been friendly, but now our bond deepened. She invited me to her nursing school events, introduced me to her classmates, and even got me involved in volunteering at a local clinic. "You've got a good heart, Emma," she said one day as we handed out meals at a community event. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd felt like I wasn't enough, never smart enough, kind enough, good enough. But for the first time, I started to believe that maybe I was. The inheritance became more than just a financial blessing. It became a way to build something meaningful. Inspired by Aunt Mary's generosity, I decided to use part of the money for charity. I started small, donating to local organizations that helped homeless youth and single mothers. But as I got more involved, I realized I wanted to do more. That's how I met Rachel, a fiery redhead with boundless energy and a passion for social justice. She ran a nonprofit that provided scholarships to kids from low-income families, and when I approached her about donating, she practically tackled me with enthusiasm. "You're amazing," she said, shaking my hand so hard I thought she might dislocate my shoulder. "This is going to change lives." Rachel became a mentor and a friend. She taught me how to navigate the world of philanthropy, introducing me to people who were just as passionate about making a difference. Through her, I met Marco, a soft-spoken accountant who helped me set up a foundation in Aunt Mary's name. We called it the Peterson Fund, and its mission was simple: to give people the opportunities one never had growing up.